Yeah, so we've heard a little bit about testing so far. We had Dave talking about it yesterday, about TDD. And we also had something from Francisco earlier today. So this is going to be a little bit different, but some of it's going to be contradictory to what Francisco said earlier today. But the thing is, this talk is about the tests themselves. So yesterday, when Dave talked about TDD, he focused a lot on what happens with your code, your application code, based on your tests. So this is going to focus on purely on the tests themselves. So I'm going to start with, if this works, I'm going to start with an example. So this is something that happened to me, now it's probably a couple of years ago. So the thing is, I got to work early Monday morning. I'm usually the first one there. And I pulled the changes from Friday, and I ran the tests. And it doesn't look very good. So this is Monday morning, 7 a.m. I'm not in a good mood when this happens. So I started looking around, and I'm really annoyed. But the thing is, I see that Jenkins, that runs our tests after every build, or that is the build process, it's green. So there's something strange that has happened here. So going back to our test, we need to understand what's going on. So this is the output from Jasmine, one of the most used JavaScript testing libraries out there. So the first thing that we see is there's a description here. So it says that, I don't know if everyone can read it, so it says that an order with life insurance, with child insurance, validates. So there's something going on with an order here. What we're making here is a shopping cart. So I don't understand what's going on. So I can see the expectation here. It said that it's expected something to be true, but it was false. It still doesn't help me much. So I start looking around in the stack trace, and I find the file that has this error in it. So it's orderspec.js. Okay, so let's go into that file. So it says basically the same thing that we read in the failing test. It says that we expected an order to be valid, but it wasn't. So I don't really know what's going on. I wrote this code like half a year before, and I didn't understand what was going on here. So I started looking around the code. So I see the first before each. As Francisco mentioned earlier today, you can nest before each. So this was the closest before each to this test. This before each is for like 3 or 4 tests. So we see that we create a new product. It says type CI, which means child insurance. I was working on an insurance project at the time. And it adds it to the cart. But the thing is, there's not anything happening with the order here. So something strange is still going on here. And I don't know why it failed. So I go to the next before each. And here there's quite a bit more going on. So this before each is for about 15 tests. So we do some stuff with beneficiaries, we create a new product, life insurance, and we add it to the cart, and we do something on the order. So at least we're doing something on the order here, but it still doesn't help me understand why that thing didn't validate. And then I go to the main before each, and I know no one can read this. The entire file had about 60 tests, so it was quite huge. So there was a lot of logic going on in this cart, because there was a lot of rules going on that we wanted to show the users as fast as possible when they added stuff to the cart. But the thing is, now I have no idea. There's too much stuff going on. So I debugged this for about half an hour, and I found the problem is this number. So the thing is, in Norway, where I'm from, your birth date is encoded into the social security number. So the thing is that we were working on child insurance, and the problem was that this user now, just because of dates, got too old to have child insurance. And this is the point you start hating your tests. And this happens naturally. You will at some point hate them. It's given. And this is also why I think we need to learn more about writing tests, because it appears to be a very simple thing, and starting out it can be, but at some point things will start breaking. But I think it's important to understand the context here. So I can just introduce myself. I'm Kim. I work as a consultant at Beck in Oslo. Working as a consultant, I usually work in 5 to 10 person teams. It's everything from, for me at least, from about 3 months to several years. My current project I've been in for 2 years. And usually this is for large companies on very interactive and complex applications. So banking, insurance, and things like that. And usually when I'm done, I just take my code and I give it to someone else. So they have to understand what's going on. And that's where part of the problem comes in. So for the rest of the talk, I'm going to talk a little bit about philosophy, a bit about the techniques that I use from day to day and that I try to use in my teams. I'm just going to try to talk a little bit about how I try to write my tests. Just grab some water first. So the thing is now, I usually work in teams where I'm not the only front-end developer anymore. So this is usually a team effort, and we really have to work together to try to get to a place where we all understand our tests. And one of the main things that this has changed for me the last few years is that I need to focus a lot on the reader. When I write a test, I need to focus on the people that are going to read the test and understand that test after maybe a half year or a year after the code was written, or after I've given this code to someone else. Because usually when you're writing code, you spend more time reading code than writing code. And I feel now that I usually spend a lot of time reading other people's code. And the main problem for me with the code that we had in the beginning, the example, was that there was a lot of setup going on. All the before each, you have to just track them back, try to understand what's going on. So where is the specific setup for this test? And for me, all that setup doesn't work because I have to go looking for code. And I don't think that dry is always the answer. People tend to focus on dry, and in regular apps, when you have a function and you want to dry up things and you collect something somewhere else and you put it in a function, that works out really well. But in a test, when you talk about dry, you should take some lines of code and you just move them up to a before each, for example. Basically, it's hidden code. So I think that we should focus on drawing up concepts, not just, oh, this line is used several places, I'll try to move that to a setup. And I really like this quote from Jay Fields. He has written a really good book on testing, which I'll mention at the end. But he says that you should create tiny universes with minimal conceptual overhead. And I think this conceptual overhead is the key here. When you're looking at a test, you need to understand that test. So we had that image in the beginning today with the things on the side so you can't see anything else. That's how a test should work. You should be able to look at that test and understand what's going on in that test. And in the test that I showed in the beginning, you didn't. You had to go look for code. So instead of setup, I do something that I call creation helpers. So here we have an example. This is the exact same test that I started with, but now with my creation helper. So here I said that I create an order, and that order contains a cart and a policyholder. So here we can see we don't have any social security numbers. We just say age. And now this function, create policyholder, knows about how to handle that. So it can create a social security number or whatever we need. But these basically helper functions have really good defaults. So if I don't include anything, they know what to do. So they give this policyholder a name and everything else that you need by default. And you just need to specify the things that you want to specify. So now we know that this is a cart with child insurance. We know that we have a policyholder that is 14 years old. And now it's supposed to be valid. And the opposite. We have child insurance, age 15, too old, and it's now not valid. This is much easier to read, and now I can understand it far easier than before, And if these become complex, the creation helpers, you can add tests for them by themselves. So good defaults is really important here. I don't specify name and all of the other things. You probably have 10 to 15 fields that you need to specify for a policy holder, but I can only specify the one that matters in this test. So an important thing here is trying to reveal intent. What's actually going on in the test? Don't try to make it as small as possible. Don't try to do things that feel good when you're writing it. Think about what feels good when you're debugging it half a year later. So what are we actually testing here? I really don't know. And on that note, it has to be deterministic. So what we had now was a test that worked for, I think, about 3 or 4 months. Then it started failing. I could have changed the age on that social security number so it wouldn't fail in 14 years instead. But it's better to do it properly. So think about this thing when you're writing tests. And also, part of this is, part of making the tests understandable is not having any ifs, for, while loops, anything like that in your tests. So let's say that we're going to test something that it's an event page where we want to say if this event is at midnight, we want it to say midnight. Otherwise, it says 12:01 a.m. because I can never understand if 12:00 a.m. is that midnight or noon. So it says midnight, noon. Otherwise, it says the time and a.m. or p.m. So I created a test for this. So it basically just loops through all the minutes of the day, 1440 minutes. And it just checks that midnight and noon is written out. But can anyone spot the bug? I don't think anyone has ever found this one. But the thing is, it seems illogical. So we have minutes, we have seconds, but the thing is, this is seconds. So this is minutes, and this is milliseconds. So we actually just ran this test for 24 minutes, not 24 hours. So you could actually have an error in here, and you wouldn't know, because it's run, it works. You have expects running, but you don't expect on how many expects that actually run. Having these for loops makes it really hard to understand what's going on. So could we do this instead? New creation helper, hours, minutes. It's really easy to understand what's going on here. And the thing is, when we have a lot of stuff going on, this is one of the problems when you start testing JavaScript, is that we start working on, for example, let's say we have a jQuery application. We start wanting to test things that happen in the DOM, but the thing is, the DOM is really hard to get started with, so when you start testing. So it's far better to start working on functional code that returns the same output no matter what you give it. So as much as possible, try to separate what's going on in the DOM and all the logic you have. And basically, it just means try to get as much as code as possible away from your backbone views, Angular directives, React components, jQuery. You really need to get as much as possible. For example, the date handling. I could easily see that happening inside a backbone view or something like that. So someone just checks if this date is 12:00 a.m., it's noon, no, midnight. So try to get it away, and you can test that function by itself. And also, when you're working with JavaScript, it's really important to see stuff fail. So I just tried to show a video here. I don't know if it's easy to see for everyone, but I can explain. I have a test here, and I just refreshed Jasmine, and it ran. I changed the test. I refreshed Jasmine, still works. So no matter what I expect here, everything still works. So the thing is, this is asynchronous code. So in JavaScript, we need to be sure to tell Jasmine when it's done. Otherwise, Jasmine will here throw an exception, but as you're already done running the test, you wouldn't know that it failed. So you really need to be sure that that your test actually failed. because this is the most important thing your tests do. If your test doesn't fail, it doesn't have any value. So it needs to fail at the right time. And this is an important thing to focus on. I've had tests that I just couldn't get to fail when I saw a bug in the application, started looking around, there's a test for it, but it really doesn't work as it should. And if your test doesn't fail, you might as well just delete them. They don't have any value. They have negative value. So I usually, especially in the beginning, when I have new members on the team, try to focus on just the process of, okay, you set up something, so you arrange something, you act on it in some way, and then you assert on it. Try to follow this pattern in the beginning. It really helps, especially when people are not used to writing tests. And in the end, so usually in the beginning, I make them write, arrange, act, assert, and then you can start deleting it and not doing it. It's just part of the just getting started thinking about tests. But perhaps most importantly, and it builds on everything else, the test should be really, really simple. Because that was the problem in the beginning. I didn't understand what was going on in my test. I had to really go looking for it. So I tried to write tests that I would be happy to debug myself. And I fail at this so often. So it really takes a lot of practice. And this is where you will feel a lot of the pain with tests, especially in the beginning. So I'll just talk a little bit about maintaining the tests. So first of it, we had writing them. Now we need to maintain them. And if they're bad, it will be painful and it will slow your development down. So if you need to use half an hour to debug a test, that should be super simple to debug. That's half an hour you can do something else. And also treat them as your application code. When you refactor your code, also refactor tests. So you need to focus on keeping them at a really high quality, like you focus on your application code. And before, I used to talk about how many tests we had. So we have 800 tests for this piece of code. It's great. But the thing is, when you have a lot more code, let's say that, or a lot more tests, let's say that I have 3 to 1. So I have 3 times the number of tests, lines of tests that I have lines of application code. Now I suddenly have 20,000 lines of code to maintain in a 5,000 lines of code application. So focusing just on this number really isn't valuable. And I think this is interesting. I think at the beginning, we should focus on testing a lot, as much as possible. But when you learn more and you see the costs and values and everything, I really tend to focus on the things that worry me most about the application. So if there's some piece of the app I use every single day, I don't focus that much on it, on testing it, unless it's really complex, of course. And even though I've said a lot of things very specifically, don't listen to the dogma. Try to be open about it. Try to think about what works for you. There's a lot of difference here between teams, between how your application works. Are you creating a library? Are you creating an application? And things like that. And at least in my team, we're still learning how to do this. And I think that JavaScript, the community, is also learning how to do this. Yeah, the testing libraries are becoming better, but we're still not quite there. So tests can be awesome, and you should experiment, and you try to keep what works and throw away the rest. And think about how you can increase the value. So, a beautiful test to me, I don't have a specific answer to that, but I have a lot of things that I like. So that's all the things that I've been through in this talk. But the most important thing to me is they should help you build better applications, and that's actually outside of this talk. That's where you should experiment and read up on a lot of other resources. Think about the talk that Dave had yesterday, for example, and look into TDD, look into other ways of doing things. And the thing is, as soon as your tests don't give you value, you really need to think about what you're doing and how you're doing it. So, Focus on the craft, focus on actually writing really good tests, focus on their impact on the application, and don't focus on Mocha versus Jasmine versus whatever. And if you want to learn more, there's some really good resources out there. There's Growing Object-Oriented Software, Guided by Tests, a really good book from the Java world, and also Working Effectively with Unit Tests and JavaScript Testing Recipes. So, thank you.